they're not always going to come out and open up to you. For example, we just had a female soldier that just walked up, and she asked us if we could fix her tire. Now, I know that's not related to homelessness, but one thing that took place right in front of you was how hard it was to ask for help with a tire. Imagine them opening up to try to tell you that they have a homeless situation. That's even harder. Yeah, your tires were bad. The two front ones were bad.
When we go to replace Private Maria Alvarez's tyres, it turns out that she too is homeless, bouncing between houses and living out of her car.
After I got out of the military, I tried to stay with my mom for like maybe a week. She didn't want me there anymore, so I had to leave from there.
Maria's story is the same one I hear over and over here. An unsupportive family and the wrong skills for a civilian job, leaving her with nowhere to turn. Until Joe swings into action.
And then we know people that, can help you out with that. And then we'll start talking about addressing your homeless issue.
I haven't had anybody help me before like that, so it's kind of emotional. It's a big deal, yeah.
Well, yeah.
Thank you.
But that's why we do what we do. That's why we're out there, raising this money, so that if you find yourself where you're not eating or whatever the case is called, I promise you will help.
I got food stamps.
Yeah, but you know what's crazy? As a soldier to be on food stamps, that's so crazy. You serve your country, you're on food stamps. And I don't mean that in a bad way. No, I know it does help. And you know what? I've been there. I'm just saying that I just wish that we didn't have to live like that. So with much love and respect.
Thank you.
Yeah, don't worry about it, man. We got your back. I mean, we're all veterans.
The number one reason why female veterans are homeless is because of untreated sexual trauma. Something that helped you from where you were before to
Dr. Laurie Katz is a psychologist who's been working with female veterans for over 20 years.
I'm a Vietnam era Air Force veteran. Woo! And Vietnam era. Yeah, good. So,
Today at the Long Beach Veterans Affairs Hospital, Dr. Katz has brought together a group of women who have all graduated from a 10-week treatment program called Renew.
I felt condemned.
They all suffer from military sexual trauma, or MST, and many had gone for decades without talking about their assaults by fellow soldiers or seeking therapy.
Why did I do that? I was ashamed. Why was I so ashamed? I knew it wasn't my fault. I knew it wasn't my fault. I knew when he beat me. I knew when he shot me in the neck. I knew when he held the gun to my head. I knew when he broke my back.
Some of the unique factors about MST is that it happens in an environment where someone continues to work and reside. The whole environment becomes a fear-inducing environment. They don't know if it's going to happen again, or the friends of the perpetrator might gang up on them to get retaliation if they report it.
And after all of that, he got his friends. They beat the ever-loving out of me and buried me. They thought they'd killed me.
Military sexual trauma is extremely prevalent. Many women, when they first come, are so shut down that they don't even make eye contact. They have difficulty feeling any feelings, so they're very numb.
I guess I always had to make sure I was working, so I didn't have to think anything about what may have happened to me in the military. It was taken from me.
I'm able to move on. I'm getting my motivation back slowly but surely, and my son is going to be able to have a mother. And I'm a year. In 4 days, I'll be a year sober. And so.
Wow, that's great.
And I never thought the day would.
Great. So this is huge. You've released so much, and you are all doing so much better.
You showed me that people out there do care. I didn't think nobody cared. And that's what touched me the most, is that you showed me that I was somebody. That I was somebody. That somebody really cared.
Cultures for eons, right?
Yeah, so the origin of it, they found it, there's a legend surrounding, a porcupine that found it was gnawing on a tree, and then the shaman, came and brought it home to his wife to cook, and the wife ate the porcupine and just started tripping out and have this intense visions and encounters with deities and understanding, truth about things in a way that was never possible. And the shaman goes back to his wife. She's like, holy shit, what's going on here? And then so, they look back where they trapped the porcupine, and it was eating the bark of this particular tree. And the tree was the Iboga tree, which grows in Gabon in Africa. And so the shaman took it, got it directly from the source, and started using the medicine. And the Iboga Bwiti tradition was born, which is where the main shamanic tradition is. And part of the shamanic tradition that I went to go see down in Costa Rica, I went to see a gentleman who was a 10th generation Bwiti shaman straight out of Gabon. So that's where it was initially founded. And then it gets a lot more press actually for its kind of drug rehab use. There's a lot of clinics for rehabilitation for like heroin addicts and different people like that. And they generally isolate the alkaloid ibogaine out of the iboga root when they do that. So it's not quite the same as what we did. We did a partial extraction, so it was like half ibogaine, but still had a lot of the full alkaloids of the iboga root. But the clinics, they just focus on the ibogaine and have an amazingly high success rate with detox situations. And I actually saw a gentleman down there at the Iboga house where I went who showed up addicted to heroin and then just had a harrowing, brutal, like 3.5 day Iboga session and came out, and he was on top of the world. I mean, really.
Wow.
Obviously.
Is it a mold? What is the
No, it's actually it's a bark.
Yeah, but what is the actual ingredients or the medicine side of that's making it?
Yeah, it's an alkaloid actually. So it's the ibogaine alkaloid is the main alkaloid, and that alkaloid is found in the bark and in the roots of this particular tree that has this weird pepper-shaped fruit that grows on it.
So what is it doing to you?
Yeah, well, it's the interesting thing about Iboga that separates it from everything else, and I'll tell my full experience as well, but the Iboga shamans and the way they talk about it is completely different than the ayahuasca shamans. Ayahuasca shamans talk about going farther. Everything is about exploring other dimensions, going beyond and bringing back information from those dimensions. And the Bwiti shamans, they talk about going deeper, like going farther inside yourself, because inside of you is a soul that has access to infinite knowledge. So you can actually go inside yourself and find out the truth to virtually anything without having to go outside. So it's a whole different kind of paradigm that it has.
Holy shit.
And as we'll get into my story, the lucidity on Iboga is unreal, like nothing you've ever experienced. It's almost like ayahuasca when you're going farther and trying to get information from these other dimensions. There's a translation issue. So sometimes it smashes against your perception and all you see are webs and colors and figures and spirit teachers and weird shit because you can't understand the information from beyond. But Iboga, it's like yourself talking to you. It's like the best version of you just telling you what the fuck is up. And you're like, and there's like no translation issue.
Inner voice?
It's like that, but it's like the ruthless inner voice of truth.
Wow.
Like you just can't fudge with it. There's no even arguing. Like there's some things that are uncomfortable to think about. Like you don't want to look at them, and it'll just be like, stop bullshitting. It's just ruthless. It's been compared to dealing with your stern father. Well, that's not a paradigm that I use because that wasn't just how I grew up. But I think for a lot of people, that kind of voice of reason that's just, not letting you slide and not letting you slack on anything comes in. And that's really what you experience on the Iboga.
Would you do it again, or would you be scared of it?
Fuck yeah, I would do it again. But
wow,
it's only because of the amazing gains that you get. It's a ridiculously brutal experience. And I guess I might as well just kind of get you guys into the story to tell about all the physical downside of it. But it's rough. You're nauseous as fuck. You're dizzy. You can't walk. You can't hardly drink water for, 24 hours. You're on it forever. It is not comfortable and not fun. And it's like, it's intense. But that access to truth, if you're trying to figure something out, unparalleled. Wow. And that's kind of, it's funny, the shaman's he's very kind of straightforward, and he talks to you like a normal, like most of these good shamans do. They're not like pseudo spiritual.
Right.
They're not trying to create an aura of mysticism.
Right. Yeah.
They're joking with you more than anybody. They're lighthearted. So I'll tell you how it kind of goes about.
In case you didn't know, there are 3 religions here in the United States. where it is legal to use Schedule I substances in their ceremonies. So I would like to discuss that a little bit more, because I find it interesting, that most of us can't take an entheogen, or some of these entheogens, legally, but these religious groups can. And so even our government recognizes that entheogens have spiritual use. The first group I would like to discuss is the Native American Church. The Native American Church legally is allowed to use peyote, and the active constituent in peyote is mescaline. So this mescaline, I've done trip reports on mescaline before. Of course, I did not do trip reports from a Native American Church ceremony, but I will post a link here to my experience on mescaline. The next group that I would like to talk about is the UDV. The UDV is legally allowed to use ayahuasca in their ceremonies here in the United States. And so ayahuasca contains a beta-carboline, which is an MAO inhibitor. As well, it contains DMT, which DMT is a Schedule I drug here in the United States. You guys have all heard some of my DMT experiences. I don't believe I have any of them left on YouTube anymore, but anyway, so I've done DMT before, but I have not done it in the context of a UDV ceremony, so it'd be a highly interesting experience to have. And if there are any UDV members that are watching this video, if you feel like sharing an experience report of how the church ceremony goes, I would love to find out more information on that. As well, I would like to say that the UDV is Christian-based, so that's also interesting. I think a lot of people that are the anti-drug folks would be really surprised to think that a Christian religion would be using a substance like an entheogen as their sacrament and experiencing altered states as a form of worship. But for me, it's kind of like a no-brainer, right? I mean, that's what every religion is supposed to be about, is experiencing God. And as we all know, those of us who have used entheogens and gained spiritual insights from them, well, we've experienced that. So I can see why any religious faith would want to use them, absolutely. The last group that I would like to talk about is the Santo Daime, but this group also uses ayahuasca. They're similar to the UDV, although I think that they have slightly different religious beliefs when it comes to their sacrament and ceremonial use. But ultimately, it's still an MAOI-containing plant and a DMT-containing plant, and they brew this up into a tea and everyone drinks it. So, and again, just like the UDV, DMT is Schedule I for just the average person who is not a member of this church. So there are branches of these churches in every state. So if you're looking for a way to explore your spirituality with the use of entheogens without breaking the law, with having a reliable and quality substance given to you by people who know what they're doing, who've done it for a long time, centuries, some of these religions, right? And then people that are actually helping you integrate the experiences properly and are helping you have the proper space and setting to have a spiritual experience and to discover the most about yourself that you can. So if you are looking for that, then I would highly suggest checking out some of these religions. I always say that I can't suggest for anyone to use any substances, but I certainly can suggest for people to become spiritual and to take part in religions where substance use is legal. So anyway, that's what I'm doing in this video. And definitely, I would love to hear your experiences when you are doing journeys along with these churches. I would love to hear that. Native American Church, UDV, Santo Daime. If you're a member of any of those churches, please post video responses, because I would love to hear your experiences, and I know everyone else would too.
We had 14 years of evidence showing that that wasn't true, that we had taken very good care of people. It's the central thing that we do. We're helping people wake up and heal. Why would we be cavalier? The judge at the end of the trial said, look, this is really simple. This is a legitimate religion. These people are legitimate practitioners of it. The only question is, how are we going to help them bring their tea in to satisfy the need for the government to have control over drugs? The government has absolutely no right to interfere in how we conduct ourselves. The only point of interface is the bringing in of the tea and the accounting for the tea, because the judge and they and us, we completely agree, we don't want the daime being used for any other than its assigned purpose as in its religious context. So everybody agrees, and everybody at this point is completely cooperating. And the fact that we have been able to affirm the freedom of our particular way, in my estimation, is good for everybody, because freedom is good for humans. And any place that the freedom to choose how one awakens that, anything that enhances that, is a good thing. Because the most precious thing to me that can happen to a human being is to have the opportunity to wake up while we are still in bodies. Not to wait until, do your life as a difficult task and then go somewhere else. No, it's here. Let's do it here. So that work would look like this. People come in, gather. The room is set up with chairs, generally in a six-sided configuration, because our two symbols are the six-pointed star, the Star of David, and the cross. So the center of the room is a cross around which we are organized. We pray together. The prayers that we use are versions of the Our Father and the Hail Mary, and then the Hail Holy Queen, and other prayers which come from other traditions. Everybody drinks daime, and one of the rules is everybody who comes to a work must drink daime. The communion is the actual drinking of the daime. So then we sing together. We sing lots. We sing lots and lots and lots and lots of hymns. After that, there'll be a period of time up to 2 hours of total silence, before which, or in the middle of which, we drink another glass of daime. That's how we go to school. We drink daime and we go inside ourselves and we commune. After that, everybody stands up, sings hymns together, and the work is closed. That work can take anywhere from 4 to 5 hours. And this is probably the central point of the daime is nothing theoretical or ideological about it. If you drink daime and you open yourself, you're going to meet divine forces. The essential thing is not the tea. The essential thing is the experience of direct communion, which is an ancient right. You can know God. You can know the divine. You can know yourself. You can know God in you. You can, for real.
At one time, I would have judged some of these people harshly. Now they were gaining my respect as I watched them struggle to better their lives. In these ceremonies, however, I saw things about myself. One was that I carry a fear of life. Another was that I lied to myself about it. And one such lie was that nothing ever really hurt me. This self-deception had become so pervasive that it formed a curtain through which I viewed everything in an increasingly dark and obscure way. Whatever the reason was for nearly taking my life, it was hidden behind these lies. I threw myself into more ceremonies, hoping to find it.
The men are about to do the second sweat lodge of the day. The women did the first. It's probably the hottest sweat lodge I've ever seen. We had to carry them out. So going in right now kind of made me feel like a soldier going into battle and passing the wounded on the way in. And it's giving me pause to think. It was a very scary sweat lodge. There were a lot of hard feelings in the sweat lodge. A lot of things that the men were working out, and a lot of things that I felt. For part of it, I got into a place of competition, and when you do that, you start to panic, and it gets to where you can't breathe, and it takes all your focus to come out of that, to focus on the good things of life, and to get past the petty things that we do over and over again, and that's the only way you can get through these things. In the last round, I had some real issues to deal with, and the only thing that got me through that was focusing on the love I have for my children, and my family, my friends. That I can bring them love and not anger and not despair, but love. I've got that in me.
For the first time,
I have been investigating the practice of peyotism with the Oklahoma Native Americans. Hearing about their beliefs and legal struggles has made me understand them more. Maybe peyote can help people heal, but to be able to come down to a conclusion, I must experience it myself. Okay, I am participating in the purification ceremony. All participants entering the sweat lodge are fanned by the cedar smoke with eagle feathers to cleanse the human soul before the final stage of the ceremony. I'm still nervous about entering the lodge. It's incredibly hot and claustrophobic, and once you enter, you cannot exit until the ceremony is over. But I'm curious to see if I'll experience the purification that the Oklahoma speak of.
We're chasing away that smell of the humans so that them good spirits can smell only good in you.
Grandfather, Tumkashala, we thank you for this beautiful day to come before you, to be here in this sacred space in this sacred way. We're thankful for all the family and all the brothers and sisters and all these beautiful little ones that have come here today to join us in this connection with creators. We come to you to offer our heart to you and ask you to come into our hearts and to bless our lives. Hunky hey, it's a good day to die. It's an even better day to live forever.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Immediately upon exit of the sweat lodge, we were taken to the stream, which represents a mother's blood and a rebirth. I am reborn.
If I didn't have pants on, I would ask you to duck yourself, but you got pants on, so there you go. Oh, fire, brother. Right up by that fire. Get you dried back up and warmed up.
I just spent about 20 minutes in there. It's the most intense experience I've ever had. I don't know how many degrees it was in there, but it was very, very hot. I felt my entire body going numb, and I didn't think I was going to be able to tolerate it. And it was a matter of surviving those 20 minutes out of respect, out of love, and out of a curiosity to find something new. I was scared. My heart was racing. I'm a doctor, so I was thinking about all the potential things that the heat could do to me. My heart rate, my blood pressure, everything. I held on to Jareth, who gave me strength. There's no way that you can go in there if you're part of my world, part of the world that it's not used to this. There's no way that you can go in there if you don't trust whoever is taking you there. So I trusted. They held my hand and told me that it was going to be okay. And it was. Before I came here, peyote to me was a Schedule 1 drug, an illicit substance, something that people would take to get high, such as LSD. But after spending 2 days here, going through the ritual, actually spending more than 20 minutes in a sweat lodge, experiencing that myself, I can tell you one thing. These people are not taking peyote to get high. This is their sacrament, their religion. This is what they believe in. I don't know if it's a placebo, but if it works for them, it heals. That, my friends, that's what it's all about.
Peyote medicine is how I got my start. I've got friends at the Peyote Way Church of God. They were going to be here. They couldn't be here. Maybe one day we'll have a Peyote track at MAPS. That would be nice in the United States of America. So, I'm going to kind of explore, the developing role of traditional spiritual medicine, not just ayahuasca, in modern society from the perspective of myself as a doctor. What's driving ayahuasca medical tourism? I'm not talking about just psychonautics and explorers, but there are a lot of people who are going down there for healthcare, and that's what we see primarily at our center. And why do they come? What aren't they getting from the healthcare system here? What are we providing at centers like Niwerao? And what might be the role of our medicine and other traditional spiritual medicines in the future of healthcare? I also promised Anderson Di Bernardi I would plug him. This is his artwork and his website. Check it out. This is my background. She went over it. So I had this great video with Icaros in there talking about how for the last few years I am training under Ricardo Amaringo in Shipibo Shamanism. And, trying to fit this talk, I got back from the Amazon on Sunday. We're working very hard there for the people there, running 4 ceremonies per week, and I'm assisting in that, for over half the year. With my prior background, and this is what I've come up with. Too bad, it was a really cool video montage. It doesn't work on the system. This is my main message, since I have this anxiety that I will not be able to get my message across. I'm just giving you the punchline, and then we'll race towards the question period. And so it's a little technical, but I'm going to try to explain it. Traditional ayahuasca ceremony offers an opportunity for rapid limbic revision, resulting in profound healing, likely in part through epigenetic revision in the limbic system and related structures and beyond. Traditional cultural technologies are particularly well suited to address our limbic system, which is largely subconscious. This has great implications for repairing limbic dysfunction and related psychoneuroimmunologic dysfunction. So then I say psychedelic treatment with proper set and setting, which integrates things like tribal and shamanic ceremonial concepts like the MDMA assisted psychotherapy may work through similar mechanisms. So here we go, the race begins. First, this is our center. We are, that's our website. Please come visit us. Niwerao Centro Espiritual, traditional Amazonian healing center founded in 2011. We practice traditional Shipibo medicine, plant medicine, shamanic medicine. The Shipibo people are of the Ucayali region of Peru, not from Iquitos. They come to Iquitos for the tourism to treat people from all over the world. And one day people eventually will go to Pucallpa. We heal through plant medicine, through traditional Shipibo diets with master plants, which Stephen touched on. And we are specialists in traditional ayahuasca ceremony. For our perspective, from a shamanic perspective, is kind of a spiritual illness perspective. And I'm saying that that is manifested in limbic dysfunction. What do the shamans say is wrong? They say this person has accumulated too many dark energies, dark spirits, and that's what they're coming for is cleaning. So if we don't treat and clean these energies, the person gets sick. So what do? This is our maloka. We clean. So there is similar ideas throughout all the traditional cultures. Actually, here I am with the Zulu Sangoma in South Africa recently. They do ritual bathing, plant baths, vapor treatments. They're all about ritual cleansing and cleaning, that is a key to health. Do we have anything that parallels that in Western science? It turns out, yes, we do. In the psychoneuroimmunologic world, we have this concept of allostatic burden and load. So it's basically that our stress response system, which is very well defined and described at this stage by psychoneuroimmunology, is burdened over time by accumulated stress, modified and sometimes overburdened and sometimes maladaptive. I'm going fast because I got to go fast. So they have conditions. This is the kind of things, just multiple stresses. How do you measure allostatic load? They have a measurement. It's cortisol levels, adrenaline levels, inflammatory markers. These are all links of the immune system being overburdened by accumulated stress that's sitting and weighing on the system. PTSD, great example, okay, of an overburdened stress response system. Pretty clear. This is Russ. He came to down the center a while back. Treated, got better. From the shamanic perspective, cleaning all the energies and the spirits of the war, that's what we did. So migraine, is looked at as a maladaptive response to stress, injury to the stress coping mechanism. Again, chronic fatigue syndrome and highest allostatic load. Here we see it taking shape and all these illnesses that kind of look kind of spiritual. This childhood, kids that will have their parents die. Here's all the measurements. Their HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis stress response system is marked, okay? Psychoneurobiology is the study of all this. Here's the brain. It's all very well described. This is the autonomic nervous system, very well described, connected to the whole thing, connected to digestion, connected to erectile dysfunction and all these other emotionally related problems that are so everywhere, connected to our emotions very directly, an expression of our subconscious body controlling our tears, our laughter, our digestion, our upset stomach, our nausea, our vomiting, our diarrhea. Sounds like an ayahuasca ceremony. Here's the limbic system again. There's the hypothalamus sitting in the middle, heading up the stress response system in the HP axis. And if you go to these other talks, that's psilocybin, this ain't hypothalamus. There's other people, there it is. So accumulated energy, stress from childhood, maltreatment, psychological trauma leads to increased allostatic load. Allostatic load represents maladaptive functioning in our psychoneurobiologic apparatus. Leaves us with less capacity to cope with stress, et cetera, et cetera. So then I talk about stress response system for us. Ayahuasca in a proper ritual setting and ecodos can be effective in cleaning accumulated stress damage, allostatic load burden, often resulting from emotional trauma. Epigenetics, I just want to touch on this. Epigenetics, the coding of the genes, okay? This is the coding of the genes, not the genes themselves. Very susceptible to lifestyle, nutrition, environmental toxicity, psychosocial stress. So now we see, and this is what gets imprinted. Here's them. Oh, it looks like, where is the imprinting happening during maternal imprinting, childhood trauma? Oh, it looks like it's the epigenetics, you know. Attachment theory, these neglected monkeys, what's wrong with them? It's their epigenetics. You know, early life adversity associated with broad scope of lifelong and health and behavioral disorders. The study examines whether randomized blah, blah, blah. It's basically epigenetics, okay? That's what I want to tell you. It's a growing thing. Epigenetic mechanism of depression and antidepressant action. So I think we should explore the possibility that we at the Ayahuasca Healing Centers are cleaning allostatic load, pathologically imprinted epigenetics from our emotional centers, which, by the way, are hardwired into our tears and our vomit. Rapid limbic revision. That's what I want to say. And the last thing I just want to say is spiritual health, you know, where the rubber hits the road in embodied consciousness, you know, is the emotional health is there. And so we see that. And so Jack Mabit is going to get much more into the spiritual technologies, as other people have talked about, of what we do in shamanism and in technology, but in a way that the larger community is going to understand. Emotional health is a place where that's marked. And our limbic system is there, and the epigenetic imprinting of the limbic system is there. So I think this should be a focus of some research. It seems interesting to me. That's it.
Thank you, and thank you for coming. Just briefly, I wanted to let you know that my interest in this topic is both professional and personal. I was first introduced to ayahuasca back in 1987. During a trip to Ecuador, we were working with shamans, and I met my future wife just before an ayahuasca session and changed my life in some very significant ways, including my two children, who are now here, my two youngest children. Also, about 3 years ago, I think it was, I traveled to Ecuador with my oldest son, who's now 22, who was experiencing substance abuse problems with alcohol and marijuana, and was getting into a lot of trouble. And fortunately, we have a friend who's a shaman from Ecuador who now lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and he had suggested that we travel to Ecuador to drink ayahuasca that would help him with his substance abuse problem. So trusting this gentleman very, very much, we traveled to Ecuador and drank ayahuasca under the tutelage of an older shaman friend of his who'd been drinking ayahuasca daily for over 50 years in the Rio Napo region of Ecuador. And since then, my son has, it was not an instant cure, but he's doing much better and not abusing substances any longer. So I have both a personal and professional interest in this topic. And along with my friend James, we decided to investigate how is it possible that this foul-tasting liquid from the Amazon could help people with addictions. And so we began studying different mechanisms to see if we could come up with some hypotheses that might be tested to better understand how this medicine might work. And in looking at this, we've come up with 4 different hypotheses, which we believe are interrelated, that may help explain how ayahuasca works. These are not independent hypotheses, but interrelated. And we've looked at how ayahuasca may work at biochemical, physiological, psychological, and transcendent levels. And that's what we'd like to present today. So I'll turn over to James for the hard parts of the talk.
So to set the stage for our first and second hypotheses, I'm going to talk a little bit about the basic biochemistry of ayahuasca and addiction. Mechanisms, 5-HT2A and 2C agonism is known to lower dopamine in the mesolimbic pathway. So what we're hypothesizing is that these tug-of-war mechanisms result in the net effect of normalization or stabilization of dopamine above withdrawal but below reinforcement. So on to the physiology of addiction. The elevations in dopamine that we've been talking about in the mesolimbic pathway are associated with a phenomenon called synaptic plasticity. This is a process by which nerve cells, the communication and connections between nerve cells are altered or changed. And synaptic plasticity has been associated with the development and maintenance of addictive behavior. So release in dopamine in two parts of the mesolimbic pathway that we talked about, the ventral tegmental area and the nucleus accumbens, has been hypothesized to reorganize neuronal circuits leading to or reinforcing addictive behavior. And we know drugs of abuse acutely raise dopamine in both those areas. And this results in a change in neural architecture, and that's associated with conditioned and learned processes. So this process has been referred to as diabolical learning. These neuroplastic changes result in the activation of reward circuitry even when exposed to objectively neutral cues associated with addictive behavior. When I walk down the street, I don't get a dopamine push when I see a street corner. However, the heroin addict who walks by that same street and buys his heroin will get a little bit of a rush just walking by the corner. That's the diabolical learning that we're talking about. So according to Stahl, the reward pathway has been hijacked by the addiction process. And our physiological hypothesis is that ayahuasca facilitates adaptive synaptic plasticity by regulating dopamine levels and a bunch of other associated cascades in the mesolimbic pathway. Things like glutamate and GABA and metabotropic second messengers, transcription factors. There's a lot that goes on behind synaptic plasticity, but dopamine does play a large role, we know. So again, balance is important. High dopamine, reward circuit hijacking. Low dopamine, a diminished impetus for neuroplasticity. This adaptive plasticity that we're talking about would allow the learning of new behaviors and associations without hijacking the circuit. And it would also, interestingly, support the unlearning of addictive associations and cues by allowing the person who's under the influence of ayahuasca to experience these cues in the visionary state while being protected from the dopaminergic surge that would lead to reinforcement or pathological learning, diabolical learning. On to the psychology of ayahuasca. I'm going to pass it over to Mitch.
Or interpretation. My friend Raphael, who is the shaman, Raphael Yamburla, says that the reason he wanted my son to go drink ayahuasca was that he could see what would happen if he continued to drink alcohol. He would have visions. He said he would see a fork in the road, and then he could choose which path he wanted to take. And in fact, that's what my son saw. Some of you may say that was suggested. Some may say it was real. It doesn't matter. The outcome was a very positive one. So the psychological hypothesis is that ayahuasca treats addictions by helping resolve traumas, encouraging the understanding of potential outcomes of choices, and improving decision-making. Now, on to the fourth and final category, the transcendent effects of ayahuasca. During the 50s and 60s, transcendent experiences were reported with many psychedelic medicines, including LSD and mescaline. And these were sometimes referred to as psychedelic peak experiences, modeled after Abraham Maslow's theory of peak experiences. And ayahuasca also has the potential to produce transcendent experiences, as some of you in the room may have experienced yourselves. And these are known to aid in the treatment of addictions. In fact, in some models, these are the most important experiences to have if you want to overcome an addiction. As some of you may be aware, Bill Wilson, who was the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, had a transcendent experience that did not involve ayahuasca, did not involve any medicines, but it was a very powerful experience for him. And he attributed that to his recovery from alcoholism. He later became a supporter of psychedelic medicines in the treatment of addictions. So in the 50s and 60s, LSD, was used quite commonly, quite widespread to treat alcoholism. And a recent meta-analysis published in 2002 found that LSD treatment was as effective as currently available medicines, such as disulfiram, naltrexone, and camprosate. These are also known as Antabuse, Revia, and Campril. These are medicines that doctors can prescribe today for treatment of alcoholism. We can't prescribe ayahuasca or LSD. So it was found that individuals undergoing treatment with LSD were more likely to recover from their addictions if they had a psychedelic peak experience than if they did not. So this leads to our final hypothesis, the transcendent hypothesis, which says that ayahuasca treats addictions by facilitating transcendent experiences. So in summary, we believe that ayahuasca doesn't work at any one of these levels alone, but in fact works at all these different levels as well as likely others. And that the most effective way to understand ayahuasca's efficacy is to really look at an integrative, holistic approach which considers all of these different mechanisms working together to aid in the treatment of addictions.
To go fast through the role of ritual, which is so important for the containment, the guidance of the non-ordinary states of consciousness, and for the focus of the experience. So the skill of the facilitator and how the ritual guided can make a very important change. I also want to add, although ayahuasca might have pharmacological properties for changing addictive mindset, we should not understand ayahuasca as a pharmacological intervention, but as a ritual intervention with basis in indigenous medicine. With regard to the therapeutic value, which was identified in the study, combining the statements of interviewed therapists and patients, I found following aspects: less drug craving or repulsion to drug intake, the overcoming of dysfunctional psychological patterns and psychological growth, increased self-awareness, spiritual renewal, restructuring of value systems, and new life perspective. It's, however, very important to note that ayahuasca is not a panacea. It's only a therapeutic tool, which can have positive or negative outcomes depending on who uses it, with which intentions, and in which context. And my final thoughts are very similar to those of the previous speakers. In well-structured settings, ayahuasca experience can contribute to the process of recovery from substance dependency by triggering interrelated physical, psychological, and spiritual processes that are valued in various existing therapeutic approaches to addiction treatment. The findings of the study indicate that for some patients, ayahuasca can be an effective and reasonably safe therapeutic tool for treating substance dependence. These results, however, are preliminary and need to be verified through studies that involve systematic data collection with standardized outcome measures. And I think Brian Rush, later in the afternoon, we're going to talk about this part. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anya. If anybody has any questions, the microphone's right up here, so please come up.
Yeah, you talk that ayahuasca is just a tool, a therapeutic tool, that can have positive or negative results. I would like to know more about the negative results ayahuasca can have.
In a context that is not well contained as an amplifier of consciousness, ayahuasca can negatively affect psychologically a person, can lead to paranoia, to disorientation, can lead to trauma, psychological trauma. If somebody is abused during a non-ordinary state of consciousness, or is just not contained, or a person who had a trauma in early childhood and goes through a non-contained ayahuasca experience, can be re-traumatized. Things like this. And then there's also all the other part in traditional indigenous medicines. There's plants. There's the dichotomy of plants to heal and plants to harm, and ayahuasca in indigenous traditional medicine is used for both. So there's also this energetic part.
Okay, thanks.
In several cases, church members who grew up in Christian context turned away from Christianity in their adolescence to later join a Catholic-influenced religion, namely Santo Daime, to modify rituals with non-Christian elements. So let's come to the cultural setting, which is not limited to the ritual performance as such, but the like overarching belief system, language systems, and assumption of reality and consciousness that are usually taken for granted. So our study participants see differences in the degrees of enculturation and communal organization of Santo Daime in Brazil. Yeah. Quote, in Brazil, people are very close to nature. They know how to make daime. They know the spirits who are called. They simply got a different relationship to it all. It is normal for them to take part in a daime ritual. Just like people here go to church, people there go to daime rituals. It's simply that Santo Daime there is lived like a tribal community, like living in a community, where people actually live together and don't just get together for the rituals. And it works, like the Christian church used to work here. It's the ethical and religious context that binds it all together as a social cultural mechanism of integration. This study participant has a BA in anthropology, by the way. So people live together, they do this together, and they simply are together. And here it's more like, well, people also do get together, and they're usually the same group of people, but they don't live together. And that's the important difference for me when you ask between Europe and Brazil. That's the context, that the context is missing, the context of everyday life.
Furthermore, it's become very clear that placebo treatments involve the activation of multiple neurotransmitters, including such neurotransmitters as endorphins, dopamine, serotonin, and cannabinoids. In the field of neuroscience, it's become common to compare the brain to a prediction machine. It looks like, from our work right now, that the implicit suggestions and the environmental cues of healthcare prompt changes in neurobiology, which cause shifts in a patient's sensory experiences and self-awareness. That's, well, okay, that's good enough on that. And so the third question I want to ask, the third question, does it make any difference? This is important. Does this have any value at all? Well, first, it's clear that placebo effects are real. It's clear there's a neurobiology. And it's likely that placebos account for a significant portion of the relief patients experience in a healthcare environment. I can't remember what I was thinking about. Is it important? Oh, this is especially important in illnesses where the, in many conditions, where the placebo, where the drugs that we use are only marginally better than the placebo effect. And there are a lot of illnesses like that. We obviously need new drugs and better drugs, but it's clear we can't afford to not harness the placebo effect in that clinical situation. Furthermore, placebos are important even in situations where drugs are very powerful. For example, an injection of opioids in front of a patient, in full view, doctor needle goes in. Those opioids are dramatically more effective in pain relief than if the same amount of opioids are given to a patient through an IV without the patient knowing they're getting it. And placebo
in indigenous societies, that was your first question, no? How does integration work? Ayahuasca, in indigenous societies who use ayahuasca is integrated into the society. So several people of a village are in the ayahuasca ceremony in the night, and the integration occurs naturally to talking with the traditional healer or with other participants who were there, because they oftentimes know about the states of consciousness that one can touch with ayahuasca. And then there's somehow like this commitment within the community to implement what's there, because that's what's the purpose of taking those plants, is getting like a vision or learning something. And this what is learned needs to be like implemented again with respect you asked me how frequent or how soon after one ceremony should I take ayahuasca again. I think this is very individually different. I personally believe that if people had a very strong ayahuasca experience, they should first integrate it, assimilate it, before they go to the next experience. Because the important part is, what do I bring from the experience into my life again, and how much can I take of things to integrate and implement at once. So I feel that it's very individually. There's no rule about it. Maybe if somebody didn't feel anything in one session, he wants to participate the day after and see if now he finds the answer to what he or she is seeking for.
Okay, we have time for one more very quick question. Very short.
Quick question. You mentioned personality disorders that maybe would not benefit from ayahuasca. Which ones? Just curious.
Yeah, there is some types of personality that always blame other people instead of seeing the problems in themselves, and they who are consciously resistant to self-exploration, and they can maintain this resistance strong even under the influence of ayahuasca. So they constantly avoid seeing themselves. So if a person is structured in this way, it would make maybe more sense for him or for her to undergo a different kind, more confrontative, more verbal, or other kind of psychotherapy than continuing to seeking the change in attending ayahuasca ceremonies. Very narcissistic people sometimes also don't respond so well to ayahuasca.
Thank you, Anya. We'll have to cut it off there.
Play. As children, they weren't taught to play. They didn't have the space to play, only to work and be very effective. No? So many of these people if they participate, if they are willing to participate, because most of them will not, because they would avoid to be in any potentially transformative experience, even psychoanalysis, of course. Well, they come to psychoanalysis when they're really suffering, they were abandoned or, failure to have visions and insights, panic during the session, or a strong amnesia following the session, the experience. Other possible side effects is the narcissistic grandiosity after one or two single experiences. No? This is the inflation of the ego. This is a very interesting concept also, and I'm almost finished here. There has to be a difference between insight and primary delusional experience. Insight, when one has a real insight, what the insight does is it destroys a theory, a personal theory. It changes our way of how we understood until that moment things. A primary delusional experience builds a theory. We have an experience, it is similar to an insight, but we come out with a very coherent, constructed, new theory about what things are. This is, from my point of view, of course, a problem. It can be very seductive, but it is a problem because it stops thinking to evolve. Extreme distress during the session. Thank God there are good shamans, people who can tolerate by their chants or singing or attitude, help to incapacity to bear the emergency of repressed, forgotten experience. I remember once a friend who had one experience of ayahuasca with somebody he knew and came to me very shocked because he had seen an image, an infantile image of his mother and another man that had been, he wanted me to tell him if the visions were true or not. What I did was send him to therapy to work his capacity to tolerate these kinds of things that may happen, of course. And to finish, can ayahuasca modify or help modify the potential space? Of course, I think yes. When it is a new, because it can be a new and nurturing experience. If potential space helps us to develop ourself, our true self, ayahuasca may work in that same way, helping us to discover what could be called, I won't enter in that, a true higher self. But only with further work. By further work, I mean therapy, true dialogues with other people, perhaps other experiences, continue thinking, continue moving. Further work is what we all do. But I am sure also that this further work is for all of us a beautiful road to continue traveling. Well, thank you very much for your attention.
Guard their own groins after the impact to the other fellow. Even the woman does it. She makes an uncomfortable motion. Why are they doing this? Because their brains are running a model in their own head that asks the question, well, what if I had been struck in the groin? And it makes them want to guard it as if they had been struck. This is why behavior is contagious. That's why this is unpleasant to look at. It's because your brain runs a simulation that says, well, what if a needle were stuck through my forearm? I suspect this is a Photoshop job. Actually, I got this from the internet, but it looks Photoshop to me. But that's why it's unpleasant to look on, is you're running that simulation in your head. And events like this are what led Mark Twain, long before neuroimaging, to remark, by trying, we can easily learn to endure adversity. Another man's, I mean. It's somewhat unpleasant to look at other people's adversity because it's modeled in our own head. Ralph Waldo Emerson, around the same time, also remarked, let us treat men and women well, treat them as if they were real, perhaps they are. This is the part right here of your brain that, for the purposes of our talk and in a mild simplification, generates emotion. So this is the part of your brain that models the emotions that other people feel and exhibit. And this is the part of your brain which is active when you are interpreting and modeling the emotions of other people around you to make sense of them and to find out what it is they're feeling. So that's the modeling function of this portion, which is really the anterior temporal lobe. This thing right here, this kind of thing, thumb-like protrusion, is the temporal lobe, and this is the anterior temporal lobe. So these are just some imaging studies in people who are losing empathy because of a degenerative brain disease. And what we see is that their loss of empathy is highly correlated with deterioration in the same region, this anterior temporal lobe that models or that produces emotions in you and models emotions in other people. Similar view here. So this might lead us, say, to the first law of empathy, which is that empathy begins with the covert modeling of what other people are doing and experiencing. Anton Chekhov, the playwright, once remarked, everything I know about human nature I learned from me. And that's what he's talking about, that in drawing characters and creating them, he used aspects of himself, as we all do. Because in order to understand somebody else, we're using ourselves as the initial canvas upon which to paint or model somebody else. What happens if this doesn't work so well? What happens if you have some problem in the temporal lobe that prevents you from modeling other people's emotion? What happens is that you become a sociopath. So this is an experimental situation in which people are in an emotion-generating paradigm. I think it's the fear of being shocked. Here you see a normal person generating activity in several brain areas. Here's that anterior cingulate cortex again up here in a different view. This part right here is where emotional information is fed into the cortex. This view is the undersurface of the brain, like we took the brain, just flipped it over and looked. Now you can notice the contrast between this and this. say in sociopaths, no activation in these emotionally relevant areas, none whatsoever. This next study is even more illuminating in this respect. Similar paradigm, enormous amounts of emotional activation here in the normal person. In the sociopathic or psychopathic person, we see nothing. So that one of the ways to understand sociopathy is an empathic problem that is caused by the inability to model other people's suffering. So the reason that sociopaths are not disturbed by other people's suffering is they cannot model it. There's nothing going on in their brain to make other people's suffering unpleasant to them, and it isn't, generally speaking. Other people see the world. When we say other people have a different point of view, we often take this to be a metaphor or a figure of speech. But within the brain, it is a literal truth that we regard other people as existing at other points in space, and they literally have different points of view that we have to collect by sending our own point of view out and imagining what the world looks like from that point of view. This is somewhat effortful and it's somewhat cognitive. But let's see how you guys do here. So here's a wall, 10 feet tall. 3 balls, A, B, and C, Mr. Red and Mr. Green. Mr. Green says, move the large ball. Mr. Red wants to be helpful. Which ball does he move? How many people vote for ball C? How many people vote for ball B? How many people vote for ball A? The correct answer is B, because this is what Mr. Green's point of view is. From his point of view, he can't see that there is a larger ball. So if he says move the large ball, he can only mean this one. Mr. Red's point of view, he can see all 3. In order for him to correctly interpret Mr. Green's request, he has to send his point of view across the room in space and imagine what does it look like to Mr. Green in order to make sense of his statement, in order to interpret it properly. This kind of projection is not automatic. Actually, it's somewhat effortful. And if you don't ask people to try hard, they often get this wrong, this particular question. The existence of the faux pas is an instance in social life in which one person fails to send his point of view across the room and imagine what he says, imagine how that is going to be perceived by each of the people in the room. So I'll show you just a brief faux pas, and you can tell that one of the people will say something that, had they projected their point of view out in space, they would have known that they should not say.
Jake's is strictly a house cat. You can't let him outside because he also lacks outdoor survival skills. It's just one of those things, isn't it, sweetheart?
I don't think Greg will be playing with Jinxie too much. He hates cats.
Pam, I don't hate cats. I don't hate cats. I just happen to be more of a dog lover. That's all.
Yeah.
Well, it's okay if you hate cats, Greg.
No, I don't. I don't hate cats at all.
That's okay. Just be honest about it. There's some things I hate.
I'm being honest, really? Like what?
So had his fiancée effortfully used her ability to apprehend other people's point of view, she would have known that she should not say this. There are people who have great difficulty detecting faux pas, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Here is another failure to model other people's minds. Here you see Dilbert and the pointy-haired boss. And Dilbert says, I didn't think it was possible, but for the past month I've done my own job plus Ted's and done them well. I know you're marveling at my accomplishment and you're wondering how you can reward me. And the pointy-haired boss says, maybe I can fire Carl and make this idiot do his job too. Dilbert is failing to project his point of view in space and to imagine what this situation looks like from the point of view of the boss. So the second law of empathy that we might postulate is that empathy proceeds through the imaginative projection of the mind's eye through space, time, and identity. So this we might call the third law of empathy, that empathy finishes with fine-tuning the balance between self and other, which is necessary in order to understand what other people are doing, and it's also necessary in a social sense, that people can't simply be swamped by the empathic stuff that comes from other people. So again, this part of the brain in the medial prefrontal cortex carries this out. Well, what if this doesn't work so well? What if people don't inhibit their own stuff very well? Well, there's a word for these people, and we call them selfish, literally, which is that their self counts too much in their mind because they are selfish. Or sometimes we call them narcissistic. There are a couple of useful typologies of narcissism that I'll just describe briefly here. You can imagine that one way to have insufficient inhibition of your own self is to have too much self. Like say you have tremendously strong emotions that are too much for this braking mechanism to inhibit. It's just too much stuff. Then you would have a hot narcissism. So people like this tend to be, say characterologically, artistic people often have a hot narcissism. They're so emotional that they can't rein it in. People who are experiencing intense emotion of any sort tend to be not very empathic, partly because of this mechanism. So someone having a panic attack or someone having a terrible depression, the people are usually not very empathic because their emotions have run away with them. There are people whose emotions run away with them all the time, say in a narcissism sense, and we might call that a hot narcissism typology. There's also, you can imagine, another scenario in which your emotions aren't that strong, but your inhibitory control mechanism is weak. And so it's just not up to the task of inhibiting your own stuff. And we might call this a cold kind of narcissism. In adults, when adults have insufficient inhibitory mechanisms, the things they tend to seek out are money, drugs, power, and sex. So that these people aren't inspired, but they are motivated by these other things that they want to acquire. Children are in this category because their inhibitory mechanisms are often not very good. So if you've ever tried to play a board game with a child, say, the kid keeps insisting that it's his turn every time because it's hard to inhibit long enough to let somebody else take their turn. There are also, I think this is not well known enough, so I'll just include this. Everybody knows mostly that when someone says unabashedly, well, it's all about me, and they act selfishly, that they may have some narcissistic traits. What is less familiar to people is that there's also a person who says, well, it's all about you. I'm really doing this for other people, but they still act selfishly. This also is a kind of narcissism that is probably more insidious and difficult for people to recognize. Nevertheless, it is in the world all over. So when somebody says, oh, I'm just doing this for you, or it's all about other people, or really I'm just helping other people, then you have to look at what it is they're actually doing and whether it benefits the other people or whether it seems to benefit themselves more. So this is where we've been talking about empathy, which arose as a mammalian innovation as part of the survival imperative of mammals, that they must know what is going on inside other mammals if they're to become successful mammalian parents or the young are going to survive into the next generation. And partly because of that, we have this modeling mechanism which enables us to feel into other people. We can internally understand or feel what is their sensation, what is their emotion, what is their action feel like to them. And then we have a couple of later, more cognitive, more thinky kind of empathic mechanisms. One, the effortful cognitive projection of the self-perspective in space, and then the ability to adjust the balance between self and other so that a person can inhibit their own prepotent self-perspective. I'll leave you with one final thought, and then we'll go to questions. In terms of this modeling thing, when people, for instance, move rhythmically to music, say, when they tap their foot to a musical beat, they are exhibiting the modeling function of empathy, that when you hear a regular sound like this, your brain interprets it in terms of the motor action it would take to produce that sound. And that is why you see the behavior leaking out into people's actual motor movements. That they're modeling, well, what if my foot was hitting the ground at this tempo? That would make this sound. And that model leaks out into their actual behavior. So that when you notice yourself tapping or snapping your fingers or clapping to the beat, this is what it's from. It's from this ancient modeling empathy mechanism that allows you to model and feel into communicative signals coming from other people.
In accordance with scholarly reports about the entheogenic experience, Fardados explained Santo Daime as a mystical death of the ego, a letting go. This ego loss is not permanent, as the feeling lasts only a few hours, gradually dissipating after each work. My informants say that the Daime mysticism gives one a window of opportunity to see that one's being does exist beyond the ego. One gets this impression from Eleonora. 5 minutes left? Okay. One gets this impression from Eleonora, a 37-year-old Fardata from Belgium who has been participating in Daime work since 2005. In an interview, she explained her conviction that, quote, most people who come to the Santo Daime come because they want to learn about themselves. I believe that there's nothing outside us that's not inside us. So people mostly judge everything that's outside them and say that's bad, but they don't have a clue that all these things also live inside them, and that they can only do something about it and make it better by healing these parts in themselves. Like war. Look at the war in yourself. You can't help the war outside. You can stop the war in yourself. And if a lot of people do that, then the world can change. Therefore, I think it's so important to heal everything in yourself. In justifying their entheogenic practice, my informants say that Daime provides a reliable path for encountering a primordial source of healing and tranquility. Fardato's notion of ritual ayahuasca use as a key to accessing practical or metaphysical solutions evokes Michel Foucault's theorizing on technologies of the self. Quote, specific techniques that human beings use to understand themselves so as to transform themselves in order to attain a certain state of happiness, purity, wisdom, perfection, or immortality, end quote. In a congruent manner, past and recent scholars have sought to account for the technological aspects of entheogenic rituals. For example, Bialabachi discusses the notion of tecnologias do sagrado, technologies of the sacred, throughout her dissertation on global networks of Peruvian ayahuasquero shamanism. In recognizing the potential value of entheogens, Ken Tupper frames these substances as cognitive tools. Some authors have likened entheogens to technological utensils designed to help an observer peer into otherwise inaccessible realms. It was decades ago that Alan Watts and Stanislav Grof used the language of microscopes and telescopes to depict how entheogens can magnify aspects of the subconscious self that are normally hidden. More recently, psychologist William A. Richards reiterated this analogy.
Without exception, I've ever heard, every master, every spiritual teacher is constantly talking about crushing the ego, killing the ego, bashing the ego. I could not be more vehemently in disagreement with this. This is just not truth. First of all, and I'll tell you why. Number one, because that's very violent to begin with. and God realization is not about violence, killing, and crushing anything. It's about ahimsa. It's about love and kindness and nonviolence. So we don't want to be killing and crushing anything. More importantly, we're created by God in the image of God, and there's no part of you that is not God. So therefore, if every part of you is God, what is there to crush, kill, and destroy? That's wacko. That doesn't make any sense. But it comes from an ignorance about the ego. That's where it comes from, because people see the ego as bad. But that's why I use the phrase ego personality. The ego itself is the steward to the soul. It's a very important part of your consciousness, and it's needed, it's necessary. We don't want to be killing it. It's like killing your feet. Cut your feet off, you can't walk. So without an ego, you can't live. The ego is the steward to the soul. It is the manifesting branch of your consciousness, which takes God's will and puts it into action. That's what the ego is and does. So we don't want to be killing that, because then you don't exist. However, the ego takes on a distorted personality. It becomes wayward, like an errant, wayward, recalcitrant child, which needs to be reparented. It needs to be illuminated. It needs to be taught the truth. It needs to be shown the way, and it needs to be gently reparented, just like reparenting your wounded inner child. You need to, and in many ways they're one and the same. The ego, has been led astray. So it needs to be redirected, reprogrammed, repatterned, so that now it works in harmony with you and for you, in subservience to, in harmony with God's will. Not crushed, bashed, destroyed, and killed. Listen to those words. All right, so that is what I wanted to share with you about the ego structure. We like the ego. You need the ego. Everyone has one. Masters, avatars, everyone has an ego. You have a personality. It's an important part of you.
For urban people, it opens up a little bit ecological consciousness, awareness of nature, that it's not so external to you, that you're part of it.
we are here, we came to this earth, but most of the humanity, they don't know what they are doing here. They're lost, they are around, they are fighting, and they don't pay attention to what are they doing in this world.
You know, devastation and loss of identity, and this commodification of reality, and this consumerism, mad consumerism, this lack of interest in other cultures.
I see young people, even when they drink something that comes from the nature that can expand consciousness, it may become a drug because it's without consciousness. You know, young people don't pay attention to this old world. You don't fit there. Huh? Don't feel you are excluded of the creation because you don't fit in those old structures of war and money and competition. This is not good for the life. Huh? So, young people, you have the world in your hands.
I was reflecting on that and thinking, okay, well, I feel like I'm getting something of benefit here, and I want to offer something of value in return. And it's interesting that ayahuasca, the experience itself, often feels like a gift. In fact, the word daime in Santo Daime is derived from the Portuguese term give me. So I'm both getting something of value from the plant itself and getting something of value from the people who are providing the ceremonial context in which I'm using it. And what can I offer in return? I was reflecting, the problem isn't the reciprocity. It seems to me that the problem is that the only universal medium of exchange in the modern world is money. And so I started doing some research on the history of money. And I was drawn to, well, I'm going to go into the idea of cognitive tools now, and I'll come back to the question of money. So as I wanted to talk both about ayahuasca as a global commodity and as a cognitive tool. And I just want to acknowledge that the term cognitive tool I use as a heuristic device to sort of think about how ayahuasca can help explain the value of learning, the non-medical benefits potentially, the kinds of cognitive benefits for the better than well approach that Bob Jesse talked about on Friday morning. So the cognitive tool concept I have learned about through the Soviet psychologist Lev Vygotsky, who developed what he called an extended theory of mind. Cognitive tool use has an important effect on the internal and functional relationships within the human brain. Vygotsky's concept of cognitive tools suggests that not only our minds, but also our brains and our neural architectures are shaped by our uses of tools. So examples of cognitive tools that he used primordially was literacy, numeracy, maps, mnemonic techniques, and then also scientific instruments, the abacus, computers, the internet, and I would submit also psychoactive substances. And the idea of the tool is really illustrated well by thinking of a knife in the hands of a skilled surgeon or a master chef. A knife can create miracles, but in the hands of a child who thinks it's a toy, it can be potentially dangerous. And I think the same thing can be said of something like ayahuasca. So cognitive tools are a means of symbolic and/or cultural mediation between the mind and our world. And so I would argue that certain forms of knowledge or understanding may be predicated on our facility with particular kinds of cognitive tools. So this invokes concepts of epistemology and alternate ways of knowing. So it may be that ayahuasca and other entheogens are tools for empirical investigation of consciousness, but also perhaps ecology and a relationship with our surroundings. So I'm just going to go through a brief evolution of cognitive tools that I think are important to understanding our current economic situation and what ayahuasca might be able to teach us about it. So Vygotsky argued that literacy and numeracy were primordial cognitive tools, but I think more importantly even as seeds. The advent of agriculture shifted human cognition with respect to time, the future, and nature. It also fundamentally transformed social organization, power, and economics. So the domestication of plants and animals that happened around 10,000 BCE It shifted us from hunter-gatherers to proto-urbanization. It set up the first hierarchical societies where new kinds of people came into existence who weren't involved in the direct production of or acquisition of food, so groups like priests and bureaucrats. It's notable to note that the words culture and cultivate have a common etymological origin. And it would also invoke the alienation of humans from environment or nature, and it was in the inauguration of private property and debt. And debt's an interesting concept in relation to a monetary system as I'm going to get to. Numeracy and literacy, reading and writing, are not natural to human beings like our oral language or spoken language, but must be taught as a kind of technological innovation. And it's only been around for about 5,000 years. But they were a revolutionary cognitive tool, and as I say, it does help shape our neural architecture. Compare a literate brain to a non-literate brain. There's actual neural architectural differences. Predating numeracy were tally sticks, which were early forms of tracking debt. As I say, I want to get back to that concept. And then sort of building a layers of cognitive tools upon others. So the next innovation that I think is really important is the introduction of the Arabic numerals 0 through 9, which were invented in India around 600 AD, but introduced to Europe in the late Middle Ages, replacing Roman numerals. And this allowed for new forms of arithmetic, mathematics, things like algebra, calculus, statistics, and accounting became possible. That really weren't done prior to that. Basic pebble counters or the abacus was used and then written down in Roman numerals. But the 0 through 9 decimal system created the possibility of double entry bookkeeping, which was another critical innovation as a kind of cognitive tool. Invented in Venice in the 15th century, it allowed for economic transactions to be simultaneously represented as credit and as debt. It revolutionized commercial activity as well as natural philosophy, which was implicated in the creation of the epistemic unit of the modern fact. There's one of my references down here talks about the importance of double entry bookkeeping as an epistemological revolution that was sort of the advent of modern science. So it's ultimately led to the macroeconomic measures of gross domestic product to account for economic health. It's also led ultimately to major accounting scandals such as Enron, WorldCom, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and MF Global. The scientific method took the concept of natural philosophy, as it was originally called, applying a clockwork or mechanistic model of the universe. It allowed us the illusion of human control over the natural world. Its application in medicine has resulted in mortality control, and only much later in birth control, which has led to an explosion in the human population that many would say has already exceeded the carrying capacity of the Earth. Its application in geochemistry has resulted in rapid exploitation of petroleum energy and resources in the 20th century. The past 150 years or so, our economic system has been predicated on cheap energy inputs through petroleum resources. And its application in economics has resulted in so-called risk management through complex financial engineering formulas, things like collateralized debt obligations, credit default swaps, and the like. So today, virtually all money, this is what was astounding to me when I started doing the research into the history of money. It's not the concept of money in and of itself, it's the form of money that we all take for granted. I used to believe that the pieces of paper that I carried around in my pocket were symbols of value, but nothing could actually be further from the truth. Most money that is in existence in the world today never gets put into paper and coins. It's zeros and ones, binary bits, but originally was sort of the double entry bookkeeping ledger system, where new money is created by private banks by conjuring it into existence in the form of loans. What is created is only the principal. It's the fractional reserve lending concept. And the obligatory interest that has to be paid on it comes back out of the same pool, which ultimately is a flawed system. It can't be sustained. Default and foreclosure are inevitably part of the system, and it allows for the trickle up that we see. It results in a growing inequitable distribution of wealth between the poor and the rich. And arguably the biggest gap in that distribution is not between the poor and the rich, but between the rich and the super rich, between the super rich and the super duper rich. That's where the biggest wealth discrepancies are arising today. And the mathematics of compounding interest creates a need for exponential economic growth. just showing an exponential curve on the credit market debt of the United States over the last 50 years or so. It's kind of flat.
A good change in consciousness that has set Washington and the banks, because Washington is owned by the banks now. The real government capital of the United States is Wall Street. It's not Washington, D.C. I think there has been a shift of consciousness that has slowed the government down and put them on edge. When Barack Obama wanted to go invade Syria, there was a huge uprising that was not acknowledged. But there were millions of people emailing, writing letters and saying, no, we've had enough war. We are war weary in this country. We are tired of criminal wars over bullshit pretexts in parts of the world that we don't care. It's not in our interest to know, that don't threaten American national security as to what goes on there. Syria was the touchstone to global nuclear war. And the world stopped the United States. I never once in my life, for as long as I have been standing up opposing this, have I seen the United States of America stopped when it's totally overshot itself. Barack Obama shot itself in the foot and saying, we have decided unilaterally that we got to overthrow this guy because of chemical weapons. Vladimir Putin played a key role. He obeyed the law. Barack Obama breaks them or changes them. That was a key thing. But it wasn't just Putin. It was 7 billion people saying, that's fucking enough. And the United States empire is crumbling as we speak. Now, what's clear is, because the US has been the hegemonic alpha dog for so long, is that the world doesn't have a plan B for what happens if the United States fails. But the United States of America needs to fail. The US dollar needs to fail. There is no hope for any of us unless that oppression, that straitjacket, that iron mask in which we are forced to live is removed. And we have to see that. The US dollar is like one of the major legs that must be broken down to change that consciousness about money. It's like Chief Seattle said, not until you have killed the last fish and cut down the last tree and poisoned the last river will you discover that you cannot eat money. So now the dollar is collapsing. The US empire is in retreat. The world doesn't quite know what to do, and this was discussed clearly when I went to Moscow in 2001 with the Ministry of Finance. Consciousness has not evolved to the point where people realize that money is nothing. It's not money is the root of all evil. The love of money is the root of all evil. The belief that it's power. You know, hear George Orwell and Terence McKenna laughing their asses off. What does it say on here? In God we trust. This is God. This is the God that's dying. This is the fucking God that means nothing. It's not clean air. It's not fresh water. In the world that we live in right fucking now, the hypnosis is going to break because everybody's going to realize almost in a heartbeat what matters is, do you have food to eat? Do you have unpolluted water that you can drink? Do you have air that you can breathe? Are you able to maintain your body temperature at night? And at that point, the switches go on, and mankind is faced one of two choices. That's it. When the dollar goes, it's going to be a very, very short period of time before it comes to that real fork in the road. What I'm aware of, people who had been unapproachable before, people whose consciousness was like the people living in the Matrix where you were Neo out of the Matrix, okay? It's hard to deal with, but I see people in the Matrix starting to crack. And that's satisfying. I've been waiting 35 fucking years to see these cracks appear.
We are now closer to what we call money today. I say closer because almost all money that we know of today doesn't represent any actual useful commodity anywhere on Earth. This note doesn't represent how much food or water or gold or spices or video games I have stocked up in a bank. It just is money. It's called fiat money. Fiat is Latin for let it be done, and that kind of authoritative command is exactly what gives fiat money its value. The people who make it have decreed that it is valuable. Why? Just let it be done. Because of this, the value of fiat money depends on everyone believing that the people who make it will continue to exist and have the authority that they already do. This means that the value of fiat money, unlike other commodities, can be erased by force. Let's imagine that you live in America and have a lot of dollars. Great job. Well, technically, Canada could invade and declare that the US dollar will no longer be accepted at all. Well, shucks. You now have a bunch of paper, which at best is an incomplete deck of famous American flashcards. The important distinction here is that invading Canadians could technically erase the value of fiat money, but nothing they said or did could make a commodity like gold less valuable. Other countries would still be glad to take your gold and in return give you their own still valuable currencies. No amount of force or authority or laws or rules can make a commodity like potable water any less important to drink, or gold any less rare. On the other hand, the value of fiat money depends on our beliefs, what we think. So long as we all believe that fiat money is valuable, it is. This happens all the time. What we believe, what we think we know, can actually cause those things to become true. Actual people, real objects, the way the universe works, and deities, like Zeus, can exist all by themselves, whether we know about them or believe in them. But some concepts require us to believe in them for them to be real. And if no one believes in them, they literally aren't true. It's called the Tinkerbell effect, and the value of fiat money is an often cited example. But what's really cool is the fact that there are situations where our convictions can actually destroy the very thing we believe in. It's called the reverse Tinkerbell effect, and it describes a situation where as more people believe something, that thing actually becomes less and less true. For example, the idea that driving a car is safe. As more and more people believe this, more people will go out driving, and they are likely to drive less cautiously, ironically making driving less safe. Another example would be the idea that in an election, your vote matters. As more and more people believe this, more people will go out and vote, and the individual weight of each vote will go down. It took hard work and tools to build civilization and find cures and explore our solar system, but we should keep in mind that without doing anything at all, we are still capable of creation. By merely believing in something, we can make it actually, truly real. Other things can actually be destroyed if we merely believe in them. Can you believe that? And as always,
ginormous houses. Well, it's been around for 2,500 years. It's called pleaching, or grafting trees together, or grafting inoculate matter into one contiguous vascular system. And we do something different than what we did in the past. We add a kind of a modicum of intelligence to that. We use CNC to make scaffolding to train semi-epiphytic matter, plants, into a specific geometry that makes a home that we call a fab tree hat. It fits into the environment. It is the environment. It is the landscape, right? And you can have 100 million of these homes, and it's great because they suck carbon, right? They're perfect. You can have 100 million families or take things out of the suburbs, because these are homes that are a part of the environment. Imagine pre-growing a village, right? Takes about 7 to 10 years, and everything is green, right? So not only do we do the veggie house, we also do the in vitro meat habitat, or homes that we're doing research on now in Brooklyn, where as an architecture office, we're the first of its kind to put in a molecular cell biology lab and start experimenting with regenerative medicine and tissue engineering and start thinking about what the future would be if architecture and biology became one. So we've been doing this for a couple of years, and that's our lab. And what we do is we grow extracellular matrix from pigs. We use a modified inkjet printer, and we print geometry. We print geometry where we can make industrial design objects, right? Like shoes, leather belts, handbags, etc., where no sentient creature is harmed. It's victimless. It's meat from a test tube. So our theory is that eventually we should be doing this with homes. So here is a typical stud wall in architectural construction, and this is a section of our proposal for a meat house, where you can see we use fatty cells as insulation, cilia for dealing with wind loads, and sphincter muscles for the doors and windows.